It's such a pleasure to see all of you here. So the COVID-19 pandemic has led to an unprecedented health and social crisis, and Myanmar's economy is expected to suffer greatly. Agriculture is Myanmar's most important sector, the keystone of its economy. So the pandemic and the containment measures have affected people's livelihoods through disruption of commodity flows, employment and income losses, and remittance losses, price fluctuations. Socio-economically vulnerable populations more at risk of food insecurity and malnutrition. Since the outbreak of the COVID-19 in Myanmar, ARD-SCG members have led a number of surveys and assessments on the evolving impact of COVID-19 on food security, nutrition, and sustainable agriculture. And we hope the findings of these surveys and assessments can be useful for the government and contribute to Mali's implementation of CERP. So Myanmar's livestock and fisheries are crucial to the livelihoods of many vulnerable households and an important dimension in improving nutritional outcomes in the country. So today's seminar is one of a series events we are organizing under the platform of ARD-SCG. So today we are going to focus mainly on two important sectors like livestock and fisheries. So mainly to assess the impacts of COVID-19 on these two sectors. As we all know, ARD-SCG is chaired by His Excellency Union Minister of Mali, with the Department of Planning as the Secretariat. So today we are very honored to have the Director General of DOP, Wu Chaosui, to be with us, despite of his very busy schedule. So before we start the presentation, I'd like to welcome DG to make an opening remark. DG, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mrs. Tran. Let me greet from Department of Planning. This is Chang Ji-Fan, FAO representative of Myanmar. Speakers, panelists from honorable institutions, agency, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Minglawa. My great pleasure to be here to join the seminar and to give the opening remarks at the webinar of assessing the impact of COVID-19 on Myanmar's livestock and fishery sectors. I would like to extend my warmly welcome to organizers, speakers, panelists, and all participants for making work arrangements and joining in this virtual seminar. Ladies and gentlemen, firstly, I would like to express my sincere appreciation and praise the organizer for conducting and choosing such an important interested topic. It's really a pleasure for us to participate and discuss work in depth. As we all aware, crop, livestock, etc. are very important for rural economy and livelihood of rural community. This is high time to discuss and choose right presentation to tackle for better explanation for our farmers who have in their production and income due to an avoidable impact of COVID-19 pandemic. As Mrs. Tan mentioned earlier, right after the early hit of COVID-19 in Myanmar, Ministry concerned the negative impact of agriculture sector and why the agriculture and rural development sector coordination group ARD-SCG were thoroughly discussed to conduct the rapid assessment on each sector. Comprehensively, in the smallholder farmer and food system, market assessment, commodity flow assessment, agribusiness farm assessment, livestock fishery farmers value chain assessment, etc. Series of assessments were conducted in the meantime. Here, I would like to express my sincere appreciation to our ARD-SCG members and facilitators, especially FAO Myanmar, IFPRI, USA, LIV, and partner INGO and civil societies for their passion and technical contribution in this difficult task. Challenge was to collect data information over the whole survey, in time of difficulty, most of the findings and recommendations are wanting for us to implement in our government-led CRE plan implementation. Even though the time of COVID-19 pandemic spread in Myanmar coincided with off-season of farmer, luckily production was not much disrupted. However, restriction on mobility and unstable market tends to decline their income. Now, the pandemic is continuing. We study second wave in Rakhine State. Management of production and post-harvest activities in COVID-19 safe manner becomes forefront agenda for us to consider. I strongly believe that the deliberation upon the result of assessment and recommendation when the discussion of this webinar may give an idea for immediate and deep action to protect Myanmar's livestock and fishery sector for this juncture. Thank you very much.
Thank you, DG, for your nice words and also sharing a lot of insights from your side. So now let's move to the next item of the presentation. Today we are very happy to have 5 panelists. So the first speaker, let's welcome Ben Belton. Ben holds joint appointment with Michigan University as associate professor in international department, and also World Fish in Malaysia as a senior scientist in value chains and nutrition. Today, Ben will share with us the study on COVID-19 and poultry and the egg value chains in Myanmar. Ben, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Shaji. Good morning. Yes, so this morning I'm going to talk about the impacts of COVID-19 on poultry and egg value chains in Myanmar, based on some recent surveys that have been conducted along with IFPRI colleagues Percy Fang, Nin Yi, and Xiaobo Zhang. Next slide, please. So the background to this is we've conducted fortnightly surveys of 275 broiler and layer farms around Yangon in June and July of this year. And this is one of 9 surveys of different segments of agricultural supply chains that have been conducted under the MAPSA project during the COVID-19 crisis. And you can see those surveys summarized in the diagram below. The poultry farms that we surveyed were a subset of 423 farms that we surveyed in July and August 2019. So we already had contact details for these farms, and we were able to call them back and see how things had changed since the previous year and also since the onset of the crisis. Next slide, please. So why did we originally focus on poultry and eggs? Well, this is a very rapidly growing and important sector for Myanmar. So from previous research, we know that the number of farms around Yangon doubled between 2014 and 2018. And we also know from some research that Jessica Scott is going to present later that consumption of chicken and eggs increased by 72% and 40% in Myanmar, respectively from 2010 to 2015. As a result, chicken and eggs, along with fish, are now among the most, or are now the most important animal source foods consumed in Myanmar. So they're very important. Next slide. So moving to the phone surveys, we've conducted 4 rounds of fortnightly surveys in June and July, and just completed another monthly survey in August. And these are all of farms within a 100-kilometer radius of Yangon, and with the objectives of really understanding the challenges that poultry farms have been facing since the COVID-19 outbreak. Next slide, please. So moving to the results, the first set of results relates to farm closures. So we asked all of the farms that we interviewed about their operation since the time that we implemented our previous survey in 2019. And you can see the blue bars are broiler farms that closed, and the red parts of the bars are layer farms that closed. So the first thing that you can see is the broiler sector is actually a very volatile sector, even under normal conditions. There's lots of farms closing down and opening up. And you can see there's a peak of closures in January and February. This was in response to an outbreak of salmonella. However, based on our interviews, we know that the sector was expected to recover from March onwards in the run-up to Tinjan, as demand for poultry increased again. But so COVID-19 has really served as a double whammy that's hit the sector from March onwards, and so further closures of broiler farms then. You can see the effects on layer farms don't take place immediately. That's because layer farms have a much longer production cycle than broiler farms. And then you can see again, we started asking in June and July about farms that had reopened since the COVID-19 outbreak, and you can see that farms are actually starting to reopen. However, if you compare to 2019, by the end of July, only 82% of the broiler farms that were operating the previous year were still open, and 86% of layer farms were open, and 12% of broiler farms, 9% of layer farms had actually shut down permanently. Next slide, please. So the closures of farms are primarily linked to problems with cash flow. You can see this graph is showing reasons that farms closed prior to the COVID-19 outbreak and afterwards. And you can see in both cases, low prices and cash flow problems are the most important problems. But farmers increasingly reporting inadequate cash flow as being their major problem. And the number of farms reporting that is increasing over time. So many farms are not confident that they can continue to maintain their operations with current levels of cash flow. Next slide, please. So this graph here is showing the prices of broilers, eggs, and day-old chicks, which are a key input for the sector, from May through to July. The blue line is broilers, the red line is the price of eggs, and the grey line is the price of day-old chicks. And you can see there was a huge jump in the price of broilers over the month of May. It basically doubled, and that was because of the lots of farms stopping production in March and April, and then restaurants starting to open again, demand creeping up. You can see actually the price has started to drop, and it's actually gone back to around the average level for 2019 by the end of July. So supply and demand sort of normalizing. You can see also the price of eggs has been more stable, but it's crept up gradually, and so eggs now cost about 25% more than they did in May. And the grey line is the price of day-old chicks. So during the lockdown, many of the farms producing day-old chicks stopped production because of the uncertainty. And then you really see the price of day-old chicks spiking in June, but then the government acted decisively to allow imports of day-old chicks, and that's really stabilized the price from that point onwards. Next slide, please. So there's been a lagged impact on input supply. You can see actually the farms having difficulties accessing inputs. That was quite a short-lived effect. And by June, most farms were able to access inputs again, access transport services. And so actually the shortage of day-old chicks that I've talked about became more of a bottleneck in June. And then also prices of feed started to creep up in July, again, because factories had stopped production during the lockdown period, and then there's a delay between them ramping up production again. Next slide, please. So demand for broilers and eggs has actually recovered quite well. So you can see that by June, most farms are reporting, or particularly broiler farms reporting, they don't have a lot of difficulties with sales. Next slide, please. But because of the number of farms that have closed, and also because of farms trying to save money because of cash flow problems, the number of workers employed on each farm has actually gone down significantly. So before the lockdown, poultry farms were employing an average of 9 regular workers. That's dropped to 7 regular workers in June and July. And we calculate that among the 275 farms that we've surveyed, nearly 700 regular jobs were lost. And that's a 30% reduction in the permanent labour force on those farms. So you can imagine that has really quite significant negative welfare impacts for the workers on those farms. Next slide, please. Okay, so just to conclude and to recap, the immediate effects of the lockdown have been quite short-lived in terms of, for instance, access to transport, but there have been longer lasting impacts due to mismatches in supply and demand. So, for instance, the supply of day-old chicks and the supply of feed to an extent. And so really, particularly the broiler sector was already quite a risky and volatile sector even before COVID-19, and COVID-19 has really intensified and magnified that risk and volatility. We've seen that poultry and egg prices have increased significantly. Actually, poultry prices have started to normalize again quite rapidly. The effects have been more lagged for eggs because egg farms have or layer farms have a much longer production cycle. And these price increases have likely had adverse implications for the nutrition security of low-income households, for whom egg in particular is a really critical animal source food. And Jessica Scott is going to talk about that later in her presentation. I think the government should be commended for its swift action in allowing day-old chicks to be imported. And this really averted a more serious crisis in supply. But we noticed that farms are increasingly reporting cash flow problems. This is a main source of farm closures, and this is resulting in substantial losses in employment on poultry farms as farms are trying to save money and laying off workers. So this is affecting those workers quite seriously. Last slide, please. Okay, so moving now to recommendations. The imports of day-old chicks should be allowed to continue until such time as domestic breeder farms have been able to recover their normal production capacity. It's important to provide either temporary income support or tax deferrals and so on for farms, both registered farms and unregistered farms. So many of the poultry farms are actually unregistered, but we feel they shouldn't be discriminated against in this case. And also other businesses in the poultry supply chain, which are really crucial to the sector. So livestock and poultry farmers could be included as beneficiaries in government credit guarantee schemes to help ease cash flow problems, and that could be made conditional on them maintaining or rehiring workers. And continuing or expanding income support to vulnerable households would help to bolster egg and chicken production, and that would help their nutrition security and in turn help poultry farms. So last slide, please. Okay, so all of the policy notes relating to this presentation can be found here, and that's it. Thank you, and back to you, Shaji.
Thank you, Ben. Let's welcome our next speaker, Yin Pugh. Yin Pugh is a co-founder of and also director of operations at Greennovator Corporation Limited that produces a Greenway Agri Livestock mobile app. So today she will speak about the COVID-19 impacts on fish value chains in Myanmar. So Ian Pugh, you have the floor, please.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining this webinar, and very good to see you. And very pleased to share our experience for the COVID-19 impact survey on fish value chain in Myanmar. Actually, this survey is a kind of a collective effort together with the World Fish, the Innovator, and the FAO. So that there are various stakeholders involved in this survey. Next slide, please. Yeah, so as I mentioned before, this is the multi-country survey. So like it includes Myanmar, Bangladesh, India, Nigeria, Egypt, and Timor-Leste. So this interview is started in February. So we cannot travel anymore, and so we choose the method to call the phone, and or to using the messaging app, like a kind of a WhatsApp messenger, something like that. And but stay the survey is the survey will be continuing until the December. So but today I will share the results so far. So the objectives of the survey is to explore how COVID-19 was impacted on the fish value chain actors, such as the seller, buyers, traders, and the food pellet sellers, etc. Next slide, please. Yeah. So there are eight types of stakeholders in this survey, and you may see that, like some are very very small number, but the objective of that is like we would like to include all the stakeholders in our survey, so to get the fully understanding in the value chain. So like there are totally 143 respondents, and also the data collectors are there are 10 data collectors, and they all are the coverage of the region in Myanmar is like a 29% in Ayeyarwady and 25% in Shan, and the others 22% and 3% are from Central Dry Zone as well. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I'm gonna show you the general result from this survey. Next slide, please. Yeah, so during the lockdown, what we found out is like the ability to access the transport is hugely effect on this on the value chain. So as you all may aware, the usage of the internet is increased. So the one they cannot sell in the work market, like some of the active people or active stakeholder, they start selling on the online. So as soon as the lockdown is gradually lifted, they start selling on online, and so they use the social media very well to sell to the required people, not in the work market. So, and also as because of the lockdown, the demands become bigger, and that impact on the it can impact on the supply side. So that means like a 97% of the sellers can find the buyers, yeah, but in February, but only 73% in June. So it means like it is a slightly recovery in July. Yeah. Next slide, please. Yeah. So like in the so when we set the when we see the after seeing the the value chain, when we explore into the deep dive into the production side, so that the most of the stakeholder cannot hire a labor because of their demands are low, and also they cannot sell the products very well, so that they are slightly they are hiring the labor is slightly low in the February to March, but the in the June and July, when the lockdown is eased, they can hire again. So you can see the more hiring in the in July. Next slide, please. Yeah. Next slide. Yeah. So when we found out, is surprisingly the seasonality is a bigger effect than the bigger effect than the COVID, because it's coincidentally when the COVID-19 period started, there are also the closing closing season of fishing in Myanmar. That's why when we are savvy, or when we ask to the especially I'm asking for the fish trader. So when we ask the fish traders, so they almost close because of the fishing season is closed in Myanmar. So that's why, but for others. For others farm and fisher for the other farms and fish retailer, they still operating, but the some of the kind of some of the what can I say, kind of shops. And the fishery, they have to close the fishery because of the government order to close it during pandemic. Yeah, and also there's a effort on pellet fish seller, because they have to import the ingredients for their production. So at the time they have a little bit effort on the for their feed production, but still they can produce not very big amount, but they can produce regularly the production. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this slide show the production of feed and seed in early April, is comparison between the April starting when the COVID is starting, and the state to the July. So the production of feed is declining in the February, March, but still they have to produce it. So in June and July is stay high. Yeah. Next slide, please. Yeah, and also it's also we also found that the feed ingredient price are still remain stable. So there are only the slightly changes in the rice bran and oil cake, which is ingredient for the fish feed. But generally we can say the price is the price is stable for not high price, not a very low price like this. Next slide, please. Yeah. So and also the farm fish, the price of the farm fish is lockdown and decline in the obviously in April, because the most of the people don't want to go to the wet market, and they are a little bit reluctant to eat the kind of meat, including fish. So that's why the prices decline in April, but it recovers very soon in gradually starting from May, and now the June and July the price is stable. Yeah. Next slide, please. Yeah, so most of the stakeholders said that they didn't get any assistance from any organization. Yeah, but some of the funds that they got the assistance from the NGO. Yeah, but still generally we can say overall we can say there are very little support for the key supply chain actors, for example like a fish seller, fish traders and processor like this. Next slide, please. Yeah, so then according to our survey, so we have it's a kind of we have some conclusion. We can make some conclusions and recommendations. So next slide, please. Yeah, so according to the survey, we can say, well, generally we can say the price of imports and fish has remain stable, and also the transportation accessibility and import accessibility is temporarily declined during the lockdown, but today is open again. But we cannot sure because we cannot sure for this from starting from September, because now we have the outbreak number during this day, and also the so low demand, like a lower during the lockdown, there are low demand for fish, but that might be a long-term problem. And along the supply chain, all the stakeholders are reducing the stakeholder have to reduce their production cost. So it also include the import and the labor. So because this period is not starting condition to have more labor, and also so some of only the few business stop the operation because of the COVID-19, and most of the business are stopped because of the fishing season, fishing season closure. Yeah, and also the only a few business receive the government support directly. Yeah, next slide, please. So this is a recommendation we would like to do. So to have a kind of a stable value chain, we need to provide the training and resource for the hygienic operation, and also these how to protecting the food safely throughout the fishery value chain. And also the we have to even government have the kind of guidelines like as a CERP, but the state needs the clear guidelines. It should be clear guidelines for the or for the criteria for the business to assess the assistance from the government. And also we have to provide the financial support to the business and throughout the fishery fishery supply chains. But it doesn't mean we have to provide loan or something like that. We can do kind of reducing the tax reduction or tax exemption. This kind of thing we can help them. And but we have some kind of support, like for example government provide the starting limit of the electricity. So this kind of thing is very very kind of effective for the actors in the supply chain. Yeah, and also we need to provide the cash transfer for the vulnerable groups, such as the kind of a labor family, and also the other people to stimulate the to encourage them eat more fish. So so that the fish consumption can increase and that this value chain can be stable. Yeah, and also the as I mentioned before, there are the transport logistic problem is the logistic the main problem during the pandemic. So the some kind of the limitation permission should be on the logistics. So for example, kind of, you know, so yeah, we are not we are not allowed to travel to other the other areas within the country, but stay for the you know, kind of transportation for food, vegetables, fish. There should be a special permission. It should have a special permission to travel across the country like this. Yeah, and also the now it because of this survey, we can see there is an opportunity to invest in the market infrastructure, like kind of a road or a cooling facility, something like that, and also that we need to ensure that the business in the fishery supply chain, fish supply chain, and we have to provide the services for the so for example, like a transporter, the logistic people to the during the lockdown. So because like we see there's they are the essential workers, essential stakeholders in the value chain. Yeah. So next slide, please. Yeah, so this is my presentation is this finished here. So, but you might have a question. So please do not hesitate to ask me if you have any question. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Yin Pugh. So let's move to our next speaker. As welcome Stuart Lamasny. Stuart is a psychologist and social anthropologist specialized in international research, monitoring, evaluation, and learning. Today, he will present the results of the survey on impact of COVID-19 on fishing agriculture communities conducted by IFPRI FishAdapt project, for which Stuart works as an international monitoring and evaluation specialist. Stuart, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Ms. Fan. First, apologies for not being able to see me. We have a technical issue which we've been unable to resolve, but you're not missing out on very much. I'm not very photogenic anyway. So once again, apologies. Can we have the next slide, please? Okay, this is an outline of the methodology or the whole structure. So we aimed to have 5 sources of information, identify 5 sources of information and a number of different analyses, global, Myanmar-wide, FishAdapt project, and strategies in moving forward. Next slide. So the structure of the research was to provide an indicative snapshot in the initial impact as the effect of the pandemic started to close the communities down, assist in understanding the immediate and future needs of community members from their perspective, and provide a rapid assessment baseline, which we have built on, of the resilience of communities in times of crises relevant to implementing future climate change adaptation and natural disaster risk management strategies, which is the core of the FishAdapt program. Next slide, please. So this is an outline. The FishAdapt program has 120 communities in which it works. Of those 120, 103 were available in the first survey period, 111 in the second, 106 in the third. The reason there's not 120 is we were using phone surveys, so there were some difficulties getting through at different times under different circumstances. We also did 6 in-depth discussions, so 2 in each of the regions in which the program is working. These will be developed into longitudinal case studies, but these were designed initially to give us a greater insight into the responses. So as the responses came in, we developed the questions that we would go back and we sought out community representatives to have these in-depth interviews with. Next slide, please. So these are some of the comparative findings. Where we've got nothing in surveys 1 and 2, those questions weren't asked in those particular surveys. So it was an evolving situation. As the information became available and as the situation and circumstances changed, we evolved into the third survey, which was a lot more in-depth. The first survey was designed to provide a snapshot of the situation, the immediate what is happening. The second was designed to identify the trends in what was taking place. And the third was to follow up on the first two, but also to identify the intervention strategies or the assistance strategies that we could put into place. As can be seen from the analyses here, the messaging and the implementation of all of the strategies around the COVID-19 from the government, NGOs, the WHO, everybody that participated was very, very effective. Almost 100% compliance initially, acceptance of the information and implementation. And implementation requires both parties. So it requires a party to implement, but it also requires the other person to be compliant with the situation. And we found that as well. So people entering communities would identify themselves and agree to be quarantined, these types of things. The last thing we have on the bottom there, the impact on men and women. We asked a series of gender questions in the final survey. We'll break this down a bit later on, but in general, it was equal across the genders. In some communities, it was higher, greater effect on females. In other communities, almost exactly the same percentage, a greater effect on males. And it was the particular roles they had in the community that caused this difference. Next slide, please. So this is the impact on the livelihoods. So as you can see here, the impact initially, as the restrictions came into place, was very strong. There was a very large impact. This gradually reduced down to what we have now, which is approximately 15% reduction of normal operations. So there's a lot of information here. But what we can see is that there was a return to access of the usual markets, and we were able to clearly identify that the people could sell everything that they could bring to the market. So, but what we found in the in-depth interviews when we tried to analyse this information a little bit further is that the general catch is down. Now the catch is available, but this is a fresh food product. And storage is very, very limited, particularly in a lot of communities. They don't have refrigeration, they don't have access to ice, those types of things. So they only catch and retain what they believe they can sell at market at that particular day. And there's been a general decrease in demand. A lot of this decrease is driven by lack of export markets, but in general, there's a lack of demand for the product. So this has caused a decrease in the prices. Overall, and a decrease in the catch, not because the catch is not available, but there is the lack of demand for the catch. Moving on, next slide, please. So this is a continuation of the thing. Now, overall, we have less funds coming into the family units, the individuals, family units, and communities. This is coming from a variety of different sources. A decrease in the market price, a decrease in the volume being sold at market, and a greater, or sorry, a lesser ability to have a discussion about what is an appropriate market price, because there's fewer wholesalers in the market area, fewer export opportunities, fewer wholesalers at the markets, and therefore less competition in regard to sourcing the product. So people came up with a few different strategies to try and work with this sort of evolving situation. So you can see in the last set of statistics there that the community plans in the fishing and agriculture sectors had gradually been increasing 6, 20, and now 24%. Now, some of this is coming from community initiation, some of it is coming from NGOs that are working in the area. So it's a whole mix of different things. what it does show, of course, is that the communities are willing and able to work with these plans, probably more so now than they did before COVID, because they see the necessity for them and the benefit of them. Next slide, please. So this is an indicative snapshot of the external support that the communities receive. So you can see surveys 1, 2, and 3 through the different areas. The blue is they did receive support. Now you can see very, very clearly, very high percentages, well into the 90% in all the areas of getting initial support from the government. This was mainly in the form of food allocations. So the government responded very quickly when the initial lockdown happened. Now this faded very quickly as well. So there was really only one distribution of food, and that took place quite early in the piece. And you can see in all of those how quickly it sort of dropped back. Next slide, please. So this is the labour market and the impact on unemployment. So what we found here, once again, in the statistics, but also in the in-depth surveys, there's a number of different things in interplay. There is, in general, a higher unemployment. There is, in general, a much higher underemployment. So people are not getting all the work that they would like, which is the second line there. So 64% of the communities said that the fishing folk were underemployed. We also, in the in-depth interviews, analysed the returning people into the communities. So what happened in Myanmar happened throughout the world. People that worked in other areas, in other countries, and in other regions couldn't stay, so they had to return to their homes. Coming back into the communities, this swelled the unemployment pool. Now, these people may be qualified to do the jobs that they were doing in the other areas, but doesn't necessarily mean that they can work in the fishing sector. So what we see here in this situation is that there's a higher unemployment in the sector, a higher underemployment in the sector, and a much higher general unemployment in the community, which is being swelled by the returning, the people coming back into the community. So this, in general, has caused a drop in wages because it's always a supply and demand situation. So we have a 61% of people identified, communities identified, that the wages are lower. And this is feeding into the general context of there being less money circulating in the community. Next slide, please. So alternative sources of income. People did seek out alternative sources of income in survey 1 and in survey 2, and this dropped back. You can see throughout this sort of thing that, particularly in the second set of statistics as we move down, is that people are having difficulty with their finances. They're having difficulty making loans, making their household payments, setting aside money for future shocks. In general, the whole downturn in the economic viability of the communities and the family units. Next slide, please. So these are the global shocks. Now, Myanmar can't escape the global shocks, so this is why we have included this. This will be a long-range situation spanning several years. Everybody's quite, reasonably agreed on that. That as the markets open up again, there's not necessarily going to be a buyer on the other end of the situation. It's also encountered the population fatigue. Now, this is taking place in Myanmar, but also throughout the world. So the people engaged very strongly, very quickly with it in the beginning. Now, a few months down the track, people are becoming fatigued. There's a lack of urgency. There's diminished resources, both in the community and the government, and a lack of responsive capacity. So the whole thing is becoming less effective than it was in the beginning. Next slide, please. This is the changes we're predominantly seeing in Myanmar. Some we've gone into already, that the communications to the pandemic and the responses were very successful. that the market price for fishing products have fluctuated over the survey period, but they're still predominantly below what would be called normal. Job diversification and job opportunities are the very big things that the community has asked, and they say they need to recover. So what we identified is the relief packages from the government, whilst gratefully received and widely distributed in the beginning, they didn't last very long, and now the community is seeing the effect of those. In general, there's a very a looming black cloud on the financial management, the ability to manage finances in the community. And as always, the vulnerable are shouldering a greater burden of the situation. Next slide, please. These are some of the adaptations that the FishAdapt program in particular has researched and has worked with the Government of Myanmar, particularly the Moali, which is the Ministry of Livestock, Agriculture and Irrigation, to assist in the communities. Now, these slides will be circulated to all of the people taking part in the seminar, and you can read these more closely at your leisure. So this is the FishAdapt project. Next slide, please. And these are some of the strategies for moving forward, identifying things that we found in these surveys and in the research, and integrating them into the strategies that the project is working with, and the long-term impacts that we wanted to have. Next slide, please. So this is some of the strategies that we put together with the Government of Myanmar. Supply inputs into freshwater farming. Next slide. Excess production of freshwater farming. So how the government could assist, you know, in getting more financial sources into the community. Next slide. And training for aquaculture workers. And final slide, please. These are discussions and main questions that came out of the research. Probably number 3 is a very one that really should be noted, that the communities have developed an ability to identify their collective and individual needs and report what they need rather than being assessed externally. This became very apparent as we moved through the pandemic, and they became very adaptable in changing the way that the community operated. And you've got to remember, this was a very unfamiliar world, an unfamiliar experience, and the speed at which they adapted to the situation and the compliance was almost universal. Okay, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Stuart. So just want to remind participants, if you have any questions or comments, then you can put your comments or questions in the chat box during the presentation. So then please indicate which panelist you want to address your question or comment to. Let's welcome our next speaker, Jessica Scott. So Jessica is a research fellow in nutrition-sensitive fish agri-food systems, and she has worked across the food fish Myanmar portfolio in gender and nutrition. So today she will talk about the animal source foods contributions to nutrition and the impacts of COVID-19. Jessica, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Xiaoji, and thank you to the organisers for having me to present today. So we have heard about the impacts of different aspects of fish, poultry and eggs and their value chains, and these products have really important roles for livelihoods, which has been touched on, and also food and nutrition security, which is what I'll be focusing on today, and the role of these foods in the diet. So we also want to understand what this could mean in terms of impacts of these changing food supplies on what COVID impact could look like on nutritional consequences as well. So the findings that I'm going to discuss here today are from a collaborative research paper that's in progress between IFPRI, MSU and World Fish. And I'd really like to acknowledge my co-authors here, the work of Christy Mark from IFPRI, Ben Belton and Shakuntala Thilstead as well. Thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm just going to cover today the importance of animal source foods and why that's relevant to the discussion that we're having today, consumption patterns in Myanmar, and try and finish up with some ideas of how we can inform nutrition sensitive interventions from this too. Next slide, please. So despite commendable progress with reducing malnutrition in Myanmar, the prevalence still can persist at rates that are concerning to public health. This presents in different forms. When we use the word malnutrition, we can be talking about multiple different types of presentations in forms of underweight or wasting that people might often associate, stunting, but really hidden hunger is becoming more prevalent globally and is a key concern in Myanmar as well too. And that's things that we can't see, such as micronutrient deficiencies. In Myanmar, it presents really significantly in the forms of anemia. So this is something we can't see, but really affects children's development and productivity, particularly for women, is of concern as well too. And malnutrition affects the life cycle differently as well. And we really focus on those intergenerational consequences. Globally, we're not on track to reach the targets that have been set to end malnutrition, and COVID is posing an even further really serious risk of worsening this. So our action in this area is of even more critical importance. Next slide, please. So we have a knowledge gap in Myanmar. Without national dietary surveys that look at asking and assessing individuals' consumption of different foods. But we do have work that has been done that gives us an indication of the general dietary patterns. And there's a few points briefly on the slides that I'm not going to go into detail in the whole diet, but a lack of diet diversity is a key concern and is one of the target areas in Myanmar as well too. We know in general fruits and vegetables and other nutrient dense food that their consumption is low, and the diet is really made up of a high starchy staples, so rice-based diet as well, and there can be excess fats and sodium, which are of concerns as well too. Infant feeding is also a problem. So how the diet is set up from the early ages of initiating solids into the diet is also not setting children up for the best start in life, and that's an area that's the National Nutrition Centre is targeting as well too. Alarmingly, though, over half of the population couldn't actually afford the cost of a nutritious diet, and that's been found in modelling through different methods by both IFPRI and World Food Programme. Now, we really need to take note of that because this is before any impacts of COVID have been factored in here. Next slide, please. So animal source foods are of high bioavailability, and that's one of the reasons that makes them different to a plant-based diet. So in low and middle income countries, it can be difficult for people to follow high plant-based diets that could be being recommended in other global narratives of paper, which have got important relevance. But when we're talking about addressing malnutrition in a country such as Myanmar, animal source foods are really a great opportunity for us to do that. They're really good for complementary feeding as well too. And that was what I was talking about. Infant diets need to be well set up so that kids can get the best start on life as well. And that's because small amounts can really fill small tummies too. Next slide, please. So the aims of this paper were really to understand the role of different and specific animal source foods in the Myanmar diet. So today I'm going to talk about them in aggregated form. So I'll just use the word fish, but in the paper, when we've analysed it, we've actually broken it down into over 30 categories of different types of fish and products. For example, the same for eggs and the meats you'll see are grouped together, but the underlying analysis really looks at these items in much more detail. So in the absence of that National Dietary Survey, we've used household survey data, and that is to, in the absence of being able to quantify intakes, to give us an idea of dietary patterns and trends. And we really want to identify culturally appropriate responses that can inform works that are upcoming in progress, such as the food-based dietary guidelines. Next slide, please. So I mentioned we're using the national survey data, so that's the ILCA and the MPLCS household data as a proxy for apparent consumption. And this has been divided down into what we call adult equivalents. So we haven't asked individual adults what they've eaten, but with thanks to Christy Mart from IFPRI, it's been divided into, but through an accepted formula that gives us an indication of what individuals could be eating. And then we use that, take nutrition composition data from neighbouring countries to look at what this could mean in terms of actual nutrients of the food consumed. So it doesn't assess the whole diet, and that's certainly not what I'm presenting on today. I'm really just focusing on these animal source foods today, but it really gives us strong indications and trends in consumptions of these nutritious foods. Next slide, please. So here we have graphed national consumption of these animal source foods, and the different colours represent the different animal source food types. So the blue that you can see along the bottom is fish, and this really shows that fish is the dominant animal source food in the diet. It makes up over 50% share for both urban and rural populations, and that was found across the regions when we looked at it as well too. So the wealth quintiles across the bottom, so quintile 1 represents the bottom 20% of the population, but and quintile 5 represents the top 20%. So we can see that there's a large disparity across consumption trends there. As Ben mentioned in his presentation, looking at those changes in supply and production of chicken and eggs, we also saw this reflected in the consumption. So those yellow bars between 2010 and 2015 really show that increase in egg consumption, and also the grey highlights the chicken, and you can see quite big differences between the two time points for that. Overall, the animal source foods actually have declined a little bit in total for the poorest people, where there was a gap in the wealthiest households consuming 2.6 times the amount of animal source foods. This increased to 3.5 times, and that was despite economic increases in the country. So this highlights why we really need to look at these this disparity of consumption across different populations in the country. And really, what are the foods that are most important to the poor? And we can see here the role of fish, eggs playing a really important role. Next slide, please. So when we take those grams per day consumption and we times them by their nutrient values, this is what the contribution of animal source food means in the diet. So fish here is providing 10% of the estimated requirement of a woman's iron intake, which is a key nutrient of concern in Myanmar. And just really quickly here, animal source foods aren't so much an energy providing food that comes from rice, but they do really make a significant contribution in terms of quality protein. The other micronutrients here, B12 is well met through animal source foods in the diet. Eggs, we can see that increase in consumption in 2015 has really contributed to increasing vitamin A intakes as well. And zinc, that is an important micronutrient for immune function, is really being provided by these animal source foods through fish, meats and eggs as well. The sodium intake at the end is really coming from fish-based products, and that's salt being added onto things like dried fish and in fermentation processes as well. Next slide, please. So the disparity that I showed in the total grams of consumption, this further exacerbates into what it means for the poorest households not meeting their nutritional requirements. So when we see how much less people are able to consume because they're in those bottom quintiles, this is where we have really significant downturn in nutritional concerns. Next slide, please. So COVID really risks increasing these inequities even further, and that's been identified across a number of social parameters, and it could have serious nutrition consequences in the population. In another recent study by IFPRI and the CDZ, they found that decreased food expenditure to cope with income loss was reported by 1/4 of the households. So that could mean more people dropping down into those lower categories of consumption. And the respondents have decreased their consumption of fish and meats. Next slide, please. So what this means is it's likely going to get worse for the people in those bottom quintiles. So if quintile 1 was to further decrease, then we're going to have a further exacerbation of malnutrition and potentially risk more forms of acute malnutrition, such as protein energy wasting and micronutrient concerns that really need to be targeted. We also, from the microsimulations that have been done by the IFPRI team as well, they identified that there's 4 million migrant workers who usually work overseas affected by a loss of income, and that 2.6 million households that were not poor pre the shock of COVID in their microsimulation are now identified at risk of falling into these categories. So if we look at this on the graph here of what that could mean for consumption, and if a greater amount of the population, and those are very significant numbers, sitting in this bottom wealth quintile, that's going to have huge consequences for the micronutrients discussed. Shocks such as food prices that Ben Belton highlighted, and eggs and chicken. Eggs are really important for complementary infant feeding, and all of those can be further exacerbated as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so this really just highlights why presentations such as today and these interdisciplinary meetings, we need to look at the whole food system. I've identified the vulnerable peoples that I haven't spoken to because I'm going over time. Yin Yin Pure also just mentioned things like changing in behaviour because of people afraid to be in wet markets. So there's many factors that take this consumption and this production all the way through to consumption that we need to consider, and I think these forums are very important for doing that. I've highlighted vulnerabilities in different groups. These gaps often worsen for women, those who are already poor, migrant populations, and we must not assume that people will benefit equally from programs or interventions that we bring out. We have to examine disparities in the country, such as poverty and wealth that I've done, what that means for nutritional consequences, and how we can address these through equitable program and policy. Last slide, please. So I will just finish up with the team who work on the multi-sectorial plan for malnutrition, and the strategic advisory group authors have also put together a nutrition sensitive guidance in the context of COVID-19 in Myanmar, and that will be coming out soon. That really covers a lot of the points that I would love to talk to you in much more detail about now, but really why we just have to continue to support all of these aspects of the value chain, from production all the way through to the behavioural elements that can be educated on, the vulnerabilities of groups, into making sure that the poorest people and the most vulnerable's consumption is protected during this time. Thank you. That is all from me. Thank you, Jessica, and over to you, Xiaoji.
Thank you, Jessica. So that's all about presentations. All the presentations will be published on IFPRI website. You can check it out there. And also for the comments and questions, please raise your hand in addition to the comments left in, you can leave in the chat box. Okay, so today we are also very pleased to have Mike Acaster with us. Mike is the country director of Wolfish in Myanmar. With his over 36 years of rich experience in fishery sector, as well as the development programs worldwide, it will be a valuable opportunity for us to welcome Mike to share us his perspective and the insights on the impact of COVID-19 on Myanmar's livestock and fisheries sector. The floor is yours, Mike.
Thank you very much, Saoji Minglabar, and thank you also to Shaw Swee Lin, Director General for the Department of Planning, Moali, for your reflections at the start. Congratulations to all the presenters. The presentations have been very useful, very interesting, and reflect a considerable amount of effort that's gone into the survey design, the selection and training of enumerators, the difficulties at times of collecting information by telephone, and the results, which I'm sure you'll all agree are very interesting and important to help the government of Myanmar to get over this crisis in the short term and reflect on what could happen when the next shock comes along, be it another pandemic or a cyclone or similar. The COVID-19 crisis came as a surprise globally. And I think it's fair to say that Myanmar was among, or is among, one of the countries least impacted in terms of humans infected and human deaths. So that is to be applauded. But as we've heard over the course of the presentations just now, the production of nutritious food has been disrupted. As has the impact on labor, employment, remittances from previous surveys, the crop sector, and the remittance amounts of funds coming into Myanmar also severely disrupted. We've heard that transport and the lockdown impacts, quite rightly stopping the movement of people at the very local level, and also in terms of international boundaries. And this has led to a number of problems, which of course relate to cash flow issues, and as is the case with other sectors as well. One clear factor is the access to credit, which is so important to small-scale producers. And at the moment in Myanmar, there is no crop insurance available. So if people have difficulties with their production cycle, they tend to limit the risk by scaling back on production, which of course has the effect of the availability of food and an impact on labor. Livestock and fishery sectors are very sensitive to access to inputs, as we've heard, whether it be day-old chicks, whether it's fish, seed, feed. If there is a disruption, clearly the production cycle is going to be limited. We've also heard about the seasonality of production and what happens where you have a crisis like COVID-19 at the same time as, for example, the disease problem in the poultry industry, or the start of the monsoon when fish farmers are trying to get fish into the water to start the production cycle. If the fish cannot be accessed because the transport is affected, clearly that's going to have a problem. And the closure of borders has also had an impact on imports. and exports. So the export market for fish and livestock badly affected. Myanmar sells a lot of both livestock and fish to nearby China and Thailand, and that of course was closed very early on. Also highlighted the supply and demand gaps, so that this has an impact on the availability of nutritious food. Some of the fisheries, important fisheries like the Hilsha fishery, the large rohu carp, squid and cuttlefish, which are caught by artisanal fishers in the Mayak archipelago and go directly to Thailand, that stopped completely during the start of COVID. One thing that it's important to mention is that the COVID-19 committee was instrumental in declaring agriculture an essential service, and this to a certain extent limited the long-term impact in terms of freeing up the access to transport. One option, of course, is to promote integrated agriculture systems, rice, fish, vegetables, to help with dietary diversity at the localities where food distribution may be disrupted by crises like COVID-19. And that leads to the need for land use reform to promote that kind of diverse agriculture. And maybe the use of fast-growing fish species, like the small indigenous fish species, which are very popular here in Myanmar. Maybe also, as mentioned by Stuart, the possibility of creating fish powder for direct human consumption. So that's easy to transport, does not require a cold chain, and is, of course, highly nutritious. So the human health problems are evident, and as we've heard, the impact on employment, sadly, will increase poverty and will increase the problem about availability of nutritious foods, and that will have an impact on the so-called hidden hunger. So I think it's important to note that many lessons have been learned, that there has been evidence of behavioral change. Communities have been instrumental in helping themselves. So through these surveys and others, we've all learned that Myanmar is very good at adapting, and the government has been able to assist. But the access to funds, credit, help with tax breaks will clearly help the sector, the fishery and livestock sector, to recover quickly, and then hopefully learn in terms of what may happen next with the next crisis. So thank you very much. Back to you, Saoji.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you for for your good reflection of your experience, and also in conjunction with this special pandemic period. And now we have concluded all our presentations. Now, once again, I want to extend a big thank you to all speakers for sharing your study results, findings, and experiences. I believe for all participants agree with me, they opened our eyes to see the potential impact of COVID-19 on agriculture sector, particularly like livestock and fisheries, and provide evidence-based recommendations on how to cope with the current challenge and what the future roadmap for the agriculture development. So then, before we open the session for Q&A, just want to inform you all the all the presentations will be posted on the website, and you can access it later on. Just to reiterate that one. So now let's open the floor to all questions. So can I invite all panelists back? Okay. Thanks, to all of you again. Then now, we have a few questions from our participants. So can I refer to the first question to Ben? It's from Mintida Mint. The question is, what are the capacities of boiler and the layer farms that you studied? And what would be your expectation when and how poultry sector will resume into regular situation? So over to you. Ben,
okay,
please.
thank you for the good question. I've just had a chance to check my notes, and so the average size of broiler farms that we surveyed was about 6,000 birds, and the medium size about 3,000 birds. And the layer farms are bigger; they're about 14,000 birds on average, 6,000 birds medium size. And so, as to when sort of demand is going to resume or return to what it was before, when production is going to return to what it was before, I think that really depends on demand and also on the supply of inputs. We can see that with broilers, they have a very short cycle, so they can be quite responsive. Many broiler farms will shut down temporarily and then start back up again when either inputs become cheaper or the price of birds goes up. So they can respond quite quickly. The layer farms, because they have a much longer cycle, there's more of a delay. But we've already seen with the broiler farms that things are starting to sort of go back to close to what the situation was before the outset of the pandemic.
Thank you, Ben. I hope this has addressed the question. We are having another question from Matt, USA. He's asking about what will any of the ongoing surveys capture how many of these firms, such as aquaculture or poultry, apply and receive the COVID-19 relief loans from the government, and perhaps any barriers they may face in applying for these loans. So I want to know, any of the panelists, you would like to provide some insight on this?
I'd be happy to answer that one. So I've been involved in both the poultry survey that I talked about and also the fish value chain survey that Yinian has talked about. And so I think that's a great suggestion, Matt. I mean, we have asked about whether supply chain actors are receiving support and where they're receiving support from, but we haven't to date asked about the details of what that support involves or how people have gone about applying for it. And so that's definitely something that we could consider for future rounds, and also maybe through some more sort of qualitative or key informant interviews as well to provide some supporting information. Thanks.
Thank you, Ben. And here we have another question from Tana Koji. Then he wants to know, she wants to refer back to the decrease in fishery productions and also sales due to limited mobility during the pandemic. They also want to know, this disruption affected both the fisheries surveyed or illegal fisheries. So these were not surveyed so far, or what the situation it is. So, IFPRI, could you please give some feedback on this? So your mic is mute. IFPRI, can you hear me now? So you are muted. Sorry, am I the only one? Okay, hear you.
Yeah, sorry. Yep. As in the question, so we haven't surveyed the illegal fishery, but we can assume that like the disruption can be affected on these fishermen as well, because there are low demand in fish consumption. So like that's why the demand is low, so that's why there may be the supply will be the surplus, so it can be affected on those fisheries that we survey or that we haven't surveyed, who are the illegal fishermen. Yep.
Thank you. Now we have another question from Papa. The question is, what is the government collaboration? Sorry. Okay, I hear some echo. Maybe I repeat. We have another question from Papa. The question is, what is the government collaboration with these findings? So with this question, I think maybe the best person to provide us feedback is DG Wu Chaosi. DG, can I invite you to give us some comments and advice?
Please unmute. Okay. Yes.
Go ahead, please. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Yes. The question is, what is government collaboration in research? Yes, the IFPRI, Department of Planning and IFPRI signed a memorandum of understanding to conduct the policy research. This is one of my answer, and moreover, our ministry, we have a mechanism we call ARESCG. So many development partners working together with us for the agricultural sector development, particularly COVID time. Even we cannot meet each other in person, the development partner show their mightiness to conduct the survey over the phone. For that, we could collaborate and cooperate with them. And also for COVID, the response. What I mean is immediate response. Our Ministry of Planning and Finance allocate 92.16 billion just for recovery plan. So for fishery sector, the 6 billion just was spent to provide seed fish to the fish farmers, and also allocate 60 million just of budget for conducting training and capacity building. And also here, I would like to extend my sincere appreciation to all speakers for their comprehensive assessment report. These reports reflect the many important issues and also findings would provide to us in developing recovery plan. Ministry of Planning and Finance and Industry and IFPRI, they are in process of preparation of the COVID recovery plan. The recommendation made by today's speaker will be very useful and helpful for developing recovery plan, especially agriculture sector and sub-sector of fishery and livestock sector. And I can discuss more detail after Q&A question, and some recommendation I would like to extend after Q&A question. Thank you.
Thank you, DG. We have another question is addressed to AMQ again. As the question is raised by Monique from IFPRI. The question is, do we know about the compounding effects on fish as a seasonality aspect COVID-19. How both the situation coincide and what were the cumulative on demand and the supply side in Myanmar?
Yeah.
Ian,
So for the
over to
first,
you.
yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, so for the first question, there might be two things. So like the seasonal effect is effect on the fishermen who are going out there, and also the fish traders and fish retailers. So because they are working, so depends on the seasonality. And also there are another group is aquaculture. They have a pond in the in inland. So for those one, they don't have a seasonality effect, but they might affected by the supply and demand the effect. So so that might be, so there's a one question. And the so for this question number 2, how will the saturation coincided and what were the cumulated effect? So for this saturation, for example, like for fish traders, so if because these two are coincided, so the effect is like, for example, they cannot export their fish to the other countries because of the food safety issue like this. And also the others people fish in like a local market, so it can also state impact on the kind of food safety and hygienic about this fish consumption in Myanmar. So I think that my questions is that my answer helpful for your concern. Yeah, please let me know if you want to know more. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian Pugh. Now we have another question. It's from Annalisa Nog. The question is actually first a comment. Thanks for fantastic series of a presentation. It appears that the fisheries and the livestock survey are both bouncing back relatively well. And all presenters raise concerns for vulnerable households. Besides cash, any specific recommendations to engage these households in these two sectors and how governments can support? I think this question is open to all panelists as well as DG. So who would like to give the first intervention? Any colleague? DG?
Yes, panelist first. Later on, yeah. I get in the vein. Okay, Mike,
Hello.
if you are. Yeah.
Sauji, can I
Yes,
say something?
go ahead, please. Yes.
Okay, well, I think, as I mentioned briefly earlier, one opportunity for the government now is to help promote land use reform. So the process of allowing farmers, especially the small-scale farmers who produce rice, to produce rice and fish and vegetables at the same time. This will allow the production of nutritious food out in localities which may be quite isolated, and so that food is available for the farmer themselves. So they may not be able to market their produce as normal, but they would have the opportunity of producing and consuming. And this is all the more likely if they're producing small indigenous fish species, which are fast growing. They're self-recruiting, so they don't need access to a hatchery, and they can be produced in the farm context. So that's one way that can help vulnerable households, poor households, the small-scale farmers, to get access to food when it's really needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Yes, Jessica, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. I think it's a really good question. So I'd follow on from Mike's comment about availability of food and look at it from an accessibility aspect. The presentations today have highlighted fluctuations in price, and for vulnerable groups, when we're looking at things like those shocks in remittances that have been described by several of us today, if people don't have the income to buy food that's available in a market. That could be in urban Yangon, or that could be in some rural markets as well too. So they may not have the money to buy the food, and that's where the cash aspect comes in that Annalise is talking about. But also there's other angles we can support that through is stable food prices, possibly support with the government's purchasing or subsidies of those foods. So if there's gluts in the supply of fish, we know happens sometimes when the ponds are drying out, and both Yin and Ben have talked about those seasonal impacts on the food availability as well too. If there's seasonal gluts, a way of smoothing those out. Another way of smoothing seasonal gluts in things like fish is to process them into products such as dried fish. Fish powder's also been mentioned, and looking at products that have a longer shelf life, such as eggs as well, or it's much more limited, but not off the table is freezing these products as well too. That could have a role in then distribution in the food ration packs to include real foods in them, in the place where often maybe micronutrient powders are often provided. Things like dried fish can often meet a lot of those nutritional needs and are culturally appropriate. So those would be other ways that we could look at the distribution of food, either directly providing it or making it accessible to those in the markets. Thank you.
Yes, I might just chime in there as well. From the surveys that we conducted, very much agree with what Jessica is saying. A lot of those things that she brought up are strategies that we're looking at and strategies we've already recommended to Moali. What we did find, particularly in the in-depth interviews, is a restricted diet is happening quite quickly. So nobody is saying that people don't have something to eat, but the diet is becoming more restricted to what they self-produce because of the lack of income in general in the community. They can't buy the range of goods and foods into the community that they used to be able to do. Now, this will quite likely go on for quite a long time, many months and possibly years, until the systems recover completely, and that requires export markets to recover as well as internal markets. So a lot of those strategies to generate a greater income, a more diverse income, and also to allow the production to increase, where it's quite clear that there is more capacity both in catching and production, but there isn't the markets to sell at the moment.
Thank you, Ian. So I think we have heard from our panelists, and I hope all participants you have a kind of reflection also as well from all these presentations. Then we'll I think we don't have any further questions here. Then maybe we can come to a conclusion of today's webinar. So before I come to the last item, I want to know whether DG, you want to have a final words from your side.
Yeah. Yes. Just before I respond to another question, so I recognize the Curtis question that the private stakeholder from fishery sector could affect the SME loan or not. So regarding this, our ministry, especially Department of Fishery, collect loan proposal from the private private company from fishery sector, and then we propose to MOPFI to provide the SME loan. And firstly, in response to Annalisa's question, firstly, I would like to explain the macro level plan of the government. So during the COVID crisis time, 10% of the national budget from every ministry sent back to the General Reserve Fund. This 10% of General Reserve Fund were allocated for immediate response mechanism. Out of this General Reserve Fund, 10% of General Reserve Fund, our ministry received 92.16 billion capex. So this is the macro level action, what the government actions are carried out for response to COVID. But another question linked to the food security and nutrition. So Jessica clearly explained and mentioned that food security is strongly linked to income. For that, and for immediate response, we plan cash forward program for those people who will become jobless and incomeless. For that, as a short-term plan, we carry out the cash forward program. The budget portion for cash forward program is 37 billion cash. So the Department of Rural Development and as well as Department of Agriculture are carrying our cash forward program. And more importantly, income generation is very challenging for us to reduce food insecurity and malnutrition. For that, we also plan livelihood and income generation activities and program very soon. Now the budget year is going to be soon coming in of September. Will hereby allowed to extend activities 3 months, which means the existing budget can be spent until December in order to make sure the all activity could have good impact on the COVID in the countermeasures. The important thing is the income generation and livelihood. So I would like to recommend all ERSCG members to contribute your efforts. How can we make sure livelihood of rural people and rural community? Thank you.
Thank you, DG. I think with this, I think we can come to the closing session. Then once again, I want to thank all panelists for their excellent presentations and also participants' active engagement in this rich and constructive discussions. Then I hope today's findings, recommendations can be useful for the government when you are planning your responsive plan. And we are also here to support and work together with you for the implementation of CRP. So I want to thank DG once again for your joining today and all your views and sharing of our government investment plan, including budget support and also recommendations for the next step will be our future guidance to ensure our collaboration and also coordination among development partners and also the implementing partners. So I also want to thank IFPRI colleagues and Michigan University colleagues, USA, particularly Matt, and all the colleagues behind the screen to make this webinar happen. Because this is a series of webinars, so we are organizing. The main purpose is to share results of our work and to present this to all our partners, particularly government, for use in your policy decision making and also implementations. So then, as I mentioned previously, all the presentations will be posted on IFPRI website, and today's webinar is recorded. You can find the link on the website. So at last, I want to thank all of you once again and wish you and your family all are doing well and stay safe and healthy during this challenging time. So all the best. Have a nice day.